In the first khutbah, I would like to briefly make a comment about the events in the last few weeks regarding the action taken by Russia to annex Crimea to itself and the reaction of US and its allies. As I said many times, that we need to be reminded of the example of hypocrisy in the world politics. Always, even the reason to kick Russia out of G8 and to make it into G7 again, the reason was you had to be democratic. That is the principle you have to follow to become part of this club. And this is where we see, the same leaders, then when they visit Middle East, their attitude is different. When you look at the situation in the Middle East, they talk about democracy. They say Muslims have to, move with the times, and the time is of democracy and human rights. And when the so-called Arab Spring came about, these movements, initially they were supported. But they realized that the end result is not what we like. So they talk about democracy. When the result happens, they don't like it. So they basically, again, they go back to the old guard in order to support them in one way or another, whether it's to bring down a democratically elected government. We might not agree with them, that government which came in Egypt, but we saw the example is very obvious there. Saudi Arabia, the way it treats the Shia minority there. Look at the situation in Bahrain, the way they treat the Shia majority. For what? For protesting in a non-violent manner for their legitimate rights, according to all standards. But nobody really talks about it. Those are okay. And this is where, it's a very interesting quote in yesterday's Toronto Star, quoted by Harun Siddiqui from a professor in the University of Toronto, Professor James Rayleigh, where he says, and this is actually speaking our sentiments in the words of this person, the commitment to democracy is highly contingent. It's conditional. The Middle East is just one more demonstration that the rhetoric of democracy is used as a tool of foreign policy. It is not a principled commitment. That's how the world works. And when I look at this whole scenario of Russia coming into Crimea and annexing that to itself, and the kind of soft reaction of the Western powers, it reminds me of the reverse reaction, more strong reaction that we saw from the West when Saddam annexed Kuwait to Iraq. There was a very swift and very powerful reaction, and that's where I remember the words of Dalai Lama those days. And he said, China also annexed my country, Tibet. Nobody did anything about it. And then he says the difference is, Tibet is not like Kuwait. Kuwait has oil. Tibet doesn't have oil. We only grow carrots. And so basically that's the bottom line. It's not a principled commitment to any, concept. It's basically everything to do with oil or geopolitical or economic interest of the Western powers. And that dominates the decisions. And this is where we come again to this ayat of Quran from Surah Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُ فِي الْعَرْضِ. When it is said to them, do not make mischief and create problems in the earth, they say, we are not doing anything. We are the muslihun. We are doing good. أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ. Allah says, no, they are the mufsideen. But they do not even realize out of their own arrogance. And this is the reality that we see. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep all the Muslims in His safety and security. May Allah open their eyes to understand the wisdom of the teachings of Islam and go back to their roots, because they are suffering and I'm not one of those who would always blame the outsiders. I think that's a secondary problem. The fundamental problem, the primary problem is within. If outsiders are doing anything to us, it's because we have allowed it. The weakness comes from within, and that is where we have to go back to the basics of the Islamic principles.